Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm Wan Ha, and this is the Big Take Asia from Bloomberg News. Today on the show, an interview with Mahathir Mohamad, Malaysia's longest-serving prime minister. Mishal Husain, an editor-at-large for Bloomberg Weekend, sat down with Mahathir in the offices of his foundation, just outside Kuala Lumpur. Mahathir turned 100 years old this week. Mishal asked him about his thoughts on aging and leadership, what he thinks Donald Trump's tariff war means for Malaysia, and what he sees as the way forward in a world that's getting more tense and divided by the day. Here's Mishal's edited conversation with former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad.
Dr. Mahathir, your political life has spanned more than 6 decades, including a comeback to lead your country again at the age of 92. In contrast, Joe Biden, a younger man than you, was engulfed by debate about his fitness to lead. What are your conclusions on age and leadership?
Well, if you don't get any fatal disease, you should live quite a long time. Of course, you have to have some discipline in your way of life. You do not get fat, and you do some exercise and keep your brain busy. Thinking, talking, discussing, writing, reading. You must keep the brain active. Otherwise, the brain loses its capacity. So I practice all those things.
How do you feel about being 100? How conscious are you that you are the last of your generation in many ways?
It's a little bit frightening. You know, it means that you are very near the time when you are, well, you are no more. And so as time passes, you feel you are coming to an end. And that's not comfortable. You worry some, but then you have to accept that it's inevitable. You have to go. So while you're still around, you should do something and not just lie down in bed and wait for the time.
And you're certainly proving that in how active you continue to be, including in your public comments. On age and leadership, though, are you saying age should be no barrier at all? Because when you first left politics in 2003 at 78, you did think you were too old to run for political office again.
Yeah. Well, I thought that age would affect my capability. But I find now that age is not necessarily incapacitating. If you are relatively healthy, you can function.
But Joe Biden thought he was perfectly healthy, perfectly able.
Now, of course, some people age earlier. I believe in working as a way of keeping the mind and body active. And as you know, if you are not active, your capacity shrinks, is reduced.
Donald Trump probably on this believes as you do. He hasn't let age stand in his way.
Well, I think Donald Trump is relatively healthy, but his attitude is the problem. He has this idea of making America great again. And to do that, he feels that he has to confront the rest of the world. And that is not a very good strategy.
Before we talk more about that, I want to go back to your early life when the Japanese occupation began during World War II. What do you remember of that time?
Well, we were told that the Japanese were very cruel people. They are prone to execute people, and naturally we were very frightened. However, the Japanese, when they came in, they did single out the people who were against them, mainly the Chinese who supported China's war against Japan. But I was not a Chinese, I'm a Malay. And the Chinese have got no problem with Malays. A few Malays were also arrested and executed for things that they have done. But generally, the Japanese rule was not very desirable. But on the other hand, they were not unduly oppressive.
Except, as you acknowledge, if you were ethnic Chinese, those massacres by the Kempeitai, the Japanese secret police, targeting Chinese people, those were atrocities, weren't they? We should not gloss over them.
I'm not forgetting the wrong things that they did. But the fact is that after the war, they seem to change completely. We cannot hold their past against them all the time. If we keep on thinking about the past, the conflicts of the past, and you are affected by this, you cannot change to a better world.
But also it was economically impossible, wasn't it, for a country like Malaysia to hold these things against Japan because it was the dominant power in Asia. China was nowhere economically at that point.
We saw Japan as a good model of how a country that was devastated by war was able to recover in such a short period, and not only recover, at one time they were number 2 in the world. We thought that we should learn about it, we should copy, and we should be able to achieve what they achieved.
Let's come to the present day then, and the current reality. Since Donald Trump returned to the White House, the atmosphere of trade tension and uncertainty. How would you say Malaysia and the region, Southeast Asia, been affected?
Well, you cannot help but be affected by Trump's policies. He's against the whole world. And to him, by raising the tariff high, it will stop the goods from being imported. But this is not a very good strategy, because if you raise the tariff on imported goods, the cost of those goods coming into your country will be very high. And if those goods are required for your industries, like components, like microchips, the cost of your product would be higher.
Are you speaking from your own experience? Because there was a time, indeed for many years, when Malaysia's economy was built around tariffs on goods coming in and quotas, and Malaysia had to reorient that model completely to try and industrialize and become more of an export-facing economy. So if you were speaking directly to Donald Trump, what would you say to him? How would you put this message across in the punchiest terms?
I would tell him that he is wrong. His strategy is wrong. It's going to damage America more than the rest of the world. Of course, the rest of the world will suffer, but America will suffer more. Because all those industries which were set up by Americans outside of America to take advantage of lower costs, those industries cannot come back to America in the short time necessary. So for some time, America would still continue to import these products and with high tariffs.
And he might say to you, look at the way all these countries, including Malaysia, are desperately negotiating with me to try and get the tariffs down. He might well take that as evidence that they are the ones who are going to be badly affected, not America.
Yes, if they are exporting to America. But the rest of the world is not imposing high tariffs. So we should increase our trade with the rest of the world. With China, for example, we can increase our trade with China. And to a certain extent, we can mitigate the effect of Trump's high tariff by avoiding America.
And selling more to China.
And selling more to China and the rest of the world.
Does that have its own complexities? If you end up closer to China economically, do you also end up closer to China politically?
The fact is that China is a neighbor, has been a neighbor of Malaysia for the past almost 2,000 years. We have survived with China being a big power, but the attitude of China is different than the attitude of the Europeans. The Chinese may invade, but they do not colonize. The Europeans, the Portuguese, when they came here in 1509, 2 years later, they came and conquered us. So we have lived with China all these years, and we have to accept that China is a powerful nation. We can't go to war against China. We have to find some way of living with them.
A powerful nation where ultimate control is with the Chinese Communist Party, which is run on an authoritarian system, and which does destabilize its neighbors, which does make territorial claims, as Malaysia itself has experienced in the South China Sea.
China did not conquer Taiwan. They made use of Taiwan to get technology and investment. For China, the relationship was all right because it's useful to China.
I'm not sure the Taiwanese will see it that way.
The Taiwanese have always been very close to China in terms of investment, in terms of technology even. The fact is that if China wanted to, they could have invaded Taiwan a long time ago, but they didn't.
You see, I think if I talked to you in a previous time, you would have been more forthright about disputes like the Spratly Islands, which in the South China Sea, which is one of those areas where Malaysia's had great difficulty with China. Today, you seem to be taking a much more benign view. And I wonder, is that because of these realities that Southeast Asia is having to make a choice and China is the choice it has made?
Yeah. Well, China claims the South China Sea belongs to China. But that is their claim. We don't accept their claim. In fact, although they claim South China Sea, they have not taken action to show that this is their territory. They have not stopped ships from passing through or examined ships or imposed restriction in the South China Sea.
But they do military exercises which create a lot of alarm, live fire drills. These are not necessarily the actions of a good and peaceful neighbor.
Well, when you send warships to South China Sea, what do you expect China to do?
American warships, you mean?
Yeah. And when you purposely make a visit to Taiwan and told Taiwan that you will be invaded by China.
You mean Nancy Pelosi's visit, I think?
When she went there, for no very good reason, she went there. And immediately after that, tension rose. And when tension rose, then America says, Taiwan, you must rearm. And they had to buy weapons from America. So the tension has been increased by that visit.
In several parts of the world, we see not just tension, but outright conflict, whether it is Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, and the United States' recent strikes on Iran. You've seen a lot in your time, including living through the Second World War. What do you see as you look around and see that level of conflict in the world?
There will always be conflicts, but conflicts are not necessarily resolved through confrontation, through wars. You can negotiate. You can even go to the World Court and get a decision. Now, the rest of the world seems to think that any conflict should be resolved by war. And if there is confrontation, you should provoke countries into active action, as happened with Russia.
You see Ukraine as a provocation, you mean?
Yeah. There are many other countries which were allied to Russia but were freed by Gorbachev. They joined NATO. Russia did not object. But Ukraine has a long border with Russia. And when Ukraine joins NATO, it brings NATO right up to Russia. And naturally, this is not something that Russia can accept.
But as you've suggested, there are different ways to respond to things, and annexing part of another country's territory, as Russia has done, crossing international borders to invade with tanks, as it did 3 years ago. Ukraine would say this is a war for its survival. And in the Middle East, Israel would say that it has acted in self-defense against Hamas.
When a country is actively carrying out genocide and says that genocide is a way to defend its country, that is not acceptable.
What do you think then of the Arab countries, Muslim countries like the UAE and Bahrain, who in this entire period have maintained their diplomatic relations with Israel?
Well, they are not united. We have to accept the fact that the Muslim countries are not united. They each has got its own policies. But all these things started when Palestinian land was seized to make Israel.
Do you accept the idea of two states? Do you accept Israel's right to exist as well as advocating for Palestinian rights?
Yes, a two-state would be a good solution at this moment because there is no way for the Arabs to do away with Israel. Israel is there.
May we come to the present day in Malaysia and what you hoped the country would become by the year 2020, a fully developed country. It was a goal that you set back in 1991, and it hasn't quite been achieved. What do you think are the reasons for that?
We were progressing very well. We had certain policies in place, and the country was growing at a very high rate, 7%, 8% every year GDP growth. But when I stepped down, they decided to drop completely the policies and the strategies that enable Malaysia to grow very fast.
I wonder, though, Dr. Mahathir, if you can take some responsibility for the fact that Malaysia hasn't fully lived up to what you hoped for. Take the idea of race-based affirmative action policies that privilege the ethnic Malay majority, your own community. It means privileged access to education. It means discounts on housing. It means companies led by ethnic Malay citizens have certain access and greater privilege. Is that really the right thing to do in the 21st century in a country that should be a meritocracy?
Well, we learned from America. America introduced affirmative action to help the blacks catch up with the whites. Here we feel the disparity between Malays and Chinese is dangerous. It is going to lead to confrontation, maybe violence. And in fact, in 1969, there were race riots because the Malays generally were poor. After independence, the Chinese were rich. And even politically, the Malay dominance was eroded. Because of that, we feel that we should reduce the disparity between rich and poor, between Malays and Chinese. That was why we adopted affirmative action.
But it creates distortions, doesn't it? It has led to a brain drain of talented ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indian citizens who don't feel there's a level playing field. And I think you yourself have said there will be a time to withdraw these policies. Of course, politically, they're very hard to withdraw when parties need to win elections.
When you introduce any policy, there will be people who are not happy, people who are happy. Very few have left Malaysia. Even those who have migrated to other countries retain their Malaysian citizenship because they want to come back. This is the country that they have been brought up in, and they feel that over time things would resolve.
In your own life, amongst those you've known, leaders across the world, who did you admire? You were a contemporary of Lee Kuan Yew's, who made Singapore one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Yeah. Did you envy that?
No, I think my idol is Nelson Mandela. I knew him well. His level-headedness is something remarkable. I was the only Asian leader who met him after he was released. I was expecting him to be a very bitter man or a broken man because he was in jail. He was not. He was talking about how the blacks and the whites should cooperate in order to grow South Africa. That is something that you don't find in many other leaders.
You said at the start of this conversation that you do feel that the end is not far away, that you are prepared for that. How do you actually think about that prospect when you've reached 100?
I have had almost 80 years of experience in politics in Malaysia. And during that 80 years, I think many of the problems were resolved. Not fully, of course, but I think that my experience would be useful for future leaders of Malaysia. So I talked to them, I explained to them what needs to be done, why you should recognize the problems and analyze it, and then you will know how to treat them.
I don't think you've made life easy for your successors by continuing to speak as you do.
Life is never easy for anyone, not for me either. I do what I think is the best thing that I could do, and I think in a way I have delivered. What others think is different, of course, but I was given an opportunity to do something for this country. I have put my best effort, and I think to a certain extent I have achieved some goals.
Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This is the Big Take Asia from Bloomberg News. I'm Oanh Ha. This conversation was part of the Bloomberg Weekend interview, where host Mishal Husain speaks to influential voices in politics, business, and culture from around the globe. You can find an annotated transcript of this interview with Mahathir Mohamad, as well as an archive of past conversations with leaders like Elon Musk, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and UNAIDS Executive Director Winnie Byanyima at Bloomberg.com/weekend or in the Bloomberg app. Our special thanks to Jessica Beck, Ed Johnson, Andy Clark, and Nedi Idayu Ishmael. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.